founded Rocket Theme, which is basically a theme development company. And we do some extensions too, but it's primarily themes. Focused on Joomla, but also WordPress. And we've done some other platforms in the past, but they didn't work out. So we're just sticking with Joomla and WordPress, and soon Grav. And Grav is my other passion. I created Grav about 3 years ago. It's been released for about a year, and it's a flat file CMS. So it's a little bit different than Joomla. It focuses on speed and simplicity. And if you're interested in that, come talk to me about it later. I'll gladly talk your ear off about it. And I've been a web developer for about 20 years. I was actually doing web development in University of Florida when I was there, back when the web was new and we were all running even prior to web browsers. And then we had Netscape, and then it just all took off. So I've been doing this a long time. So a little bit about Gantry. Gantry is Rocket Theme's theme framework. And we use the word theme and not template because theme is a bit more of a generic term across more platforms. Templates is the word that's used in Joomla, but a template is quite a different thing in other platforms. So theme is a bit more of a generic term. We first did the release in 2009. We weren't the first theme framework, but we were the first real theme framework in that it was a framework and not just a template that you could extend and make child templates for and stuff like that. So it was a real theme development framework, so something that you could build themes from. So we have 80 Rocket Theme templates that are running on various versions of Gantry. Primarily it's Gantry 4, which was the last of the first generation of the Gantry framework, and now Gantry 5. And it's one of the most popular theme frameworks out there. So we've had over 1.2 million downloads of Gantry, which is, I find, quite astonishing considering it's just a theme framework. But that's a pretty impressive number. So the project goals for Gantry 5, which is what I want to cover here, the first item was speed. Speed. We did a lot with the first version of the framework, and that was Gantry 1 through Gantry 4. It was various iterations of the framework. But one thing that we were having trouble with was it was not fast enough. And the fundamental architecture that we built it with was with XML, and that was because Joomla was using XML. XML processing is slow. That was really holding us up. So we really wanted to speed things up and make sure that it was the fastest framework out there. We also wanted to make sure that it was cross-platform. The first version worked on Joomla and on WordPress, but it was quite a lot of work to get it to work on each platform, and there were quite a lot of changes between the themes. So we wanted to make it much more cross-platform so we could support other platforms more easily. We wanted it to be much more friendly to use, so that's why we went with a more human-readable config system instead of XML, which is kind of an ugly markup. We use YAML and a simple templating system. We also wanted to make the interface, the admin interface that everybody uses, much more friendly. So drag and drop, and the ability to configure things much more closely to where they are laid out. So little gears to pop open configuration panels and stuff like that. And also we wanted to make sure that it was much more modular. We had particles in our previous system, but they were very tied to the theme. You couldn't really move them around between different themes and so forth. They weren't really self-contained. Like, they didn't contain their own CSS and JavaScript. They were just sort of the rendering files. And we wanted to make sure that our form system, which we developed for the first version, was even more flexible. And we also wanted to make sure that it didn't require a lot of PHP skills. So those are the goals. So the server requirements, I'll just gloss over this. It's just basically the latest version of Joomla. Well, actually, it's 3.4 and above now. So at the time, it was the latest version of Joomla, and fairly modern browsers. It's open source like the first version was. We were the first Joomla framework that went open source. Everyone else had their own commercial one. And then we just released ours as an open source framework, and then other companies started following suit too. In the Joomla sphere, there were already some WordPress ones out there that were open source. And it's on GitHub now. We have CI builds, which are continuous integration builds. So every time we do a commit, it's rebuilt, and there's this CI build there. So that makes it easy for people to, to report a bug. We fix the bug, and they can download the CI build, and they can test the bug. So they don't even have to know how to use GitHub to be able to do that. And then we have lots of documentation. That's one thing we really wanted to focus on for Gantry 5, was to make the documentation much more extensive. So we have a pretty active community for Gantry 5. We have a Gitter chat, which is, I don't know if you're used to like a group Skype chat. It's kind of like that. There are 1,400 people in that room, 1,400 plus in that room right now. And the Gantry project has 442 stars. And the development is very active. You can see in the span of less than 2 years, a year and a half actually, we have 5,800 commits in the Gantry 5 repo. There are 3 lead developers that really do the majority of the work, and we have 13 active contributors from the community that do quite a bit of work on the project too. So it's actually wrong. That's actually Gantry. I put Gantry 5, but that's 28,000 sites running Gantry between Gantry 4 and Gantry 5. But that's pretty awesome too. Because there's just it's just TWIG templating with YAML configuration, images, CSS, JavaScript. There's almost nothing specific to the platform in them. In fact, there is nothing. And we also have the ability to run Gantry 5 with no CMS. So if you're just doing design work, you can actually do it even without a CMS. It's just called Prime. It's this Prime mode we have. And then the platforms we have Joomla, WordPress, and Grav has a CI build. We're developing that. It's almost ready for release, the Grav version. So some of the architecture things, it's just, what is it built with? We primarily use SCSS, a SAS compiler instead of less like we used to use in Gantry 4, which is just a bit more of a popular option and slightly more feature-rich than less. We use YAML, which is this sort of syntax, which I'll show you some later. It's nothing really to worry about. It's just a name value with a colon to separate to help you do configuration. TWIG for our templating, which is instead of writing PHP to have the code to render your site, use these TWIG tags, which are much safer than PHP. You can't accidentally put in something that's going to make your site vulnerable to hackers. It limits what you can do somewhat, but also that protects you, again, from accidental mistakes in PHP. And it caches, so it's fast, and it's very flexible. You can do all kinds of things you couldn't do in PHP, like extend other templates and inject variables into them and stuff. Once you've started using it, it may be a little bit of a nerve-wracking at first because you think it's this whole new thing, but once you start using it, you couldn't imagine not doing output without it. Whoops is an error handling library that gives you nice stack traces, and Pimple is a dependency injection system we use. And pretty much everything on this list comes from the Grav CMS, which we kind of developed first, and we said this would be really great inside of Gantry. So we took all the technologies that we were using and loved and put them into Gantry. And if I say Grav and Gantry into mix sometimes, please excuse me, I confuse them all the time. So some vocabulary, and this is actually kind of funny. I was just talking to Brad. We actually have some similar verbiage that we use in the Gantry framework that overlap with Brad's atomic design talk that he was doing. So we have atoms, for example. But at the top level, we have these things that we call outlines, which are like your layouts. Your overall structure of the whole page, and then the layout itself is the actual what sections go where and how big those columns are and things like that. Particles are the little are what Brad's molecules would be, kind of like that. And then we have these atoms, which are actually not the same as Brad's atoms. These are a type of particle, but they're less complex, and they don't really have any output. So it's like CSS and JS, like no visual output on the page, but you need to put them into places. This terminology of presets, which is like a group of settings. So how we can develop a preset for a particular like color scheme, and that just applies a whole bunch of settings, a whole bunch of colors probably in that case. So that's what a preset is. And then, like I said, a theme is basically a Joomla template. So some of the key features of Gantry 5 is that the admin is all AJAX. So there's not a lot of server communication for refreshing the page. It's just server communication for just exchanging data, saving and getting statuses back. So that makes it much faster on the admin. It has a whole outline system, which I can show you a little bit later on. And it has these particles, which are those molecules. So these sort of things you can drop onto your page, and you can create your own particles really easily, and even build them, exchange them between different projects, different different themes, and so forth. And these atoms, which are the invisible bits, so think of like Google Analytics, stuff like that, where you need to have on your page, but they don't visibly show up. A lot of it is drag and drop to make things easier. It has tons of overrides. So this is one thing that we kind of brought with Gantry 4 is the ability to like set some defaults and then override it, only the bits that you want to change. We have a very powerful system of that inside of Gantry 5. You can override pretty much everything. And then what's new fairly new in a couple of releases ago is inheritance. So this is the ability to inherit values from other parts of the Gantry framework. And then the new UI. So it's quite a radical change from the old Gantry 4. I know some people find it a bit jarring, but it had to be completely redone to handle the sort of the change in focus that we had for Gantry 5. So this is just a kind of summary of the admin features. So the inheritance, the layout manager, has a menu editor. Some people get confused sometimes. In Gantry 4, we worked very closely with the Joomla menu editor, and we sort of injected in optional settings that the Gantry framework could handle. So things like supporting like a mega menu with columns and stuff. But it was very hard to make that usable using the Joomla menu manager. So for Gantry 5, we have an extra menu manager that lets you define all the Gantry related things. So like that mega menu stuff and setting a subtitle or an icon on a menu item. But it doesn't take over the whole thing. So things that are relevant to the platform, you still use the Joomla menu editor, and that all still works the same way. But stuff that's Gantry specific, you use R1. And it's much more visual, so you can kind of see how things are going to look. And it's got style configuration, so you can easily modify your colors and fonts and things like that. Also has an assignments manager, and this is similar to the module assignments, but instead of that, it's much more flexible. And also, we have to have these things because there's similar concepts are needed on all platforms. And it has a positions manager, but this isn't needed inside of Joomla because this is actually done by the module manager inside of Joomla. But in other platforms like WordPress and Grav, they don't have this concept. So Gantry provides it. So this is just a quick sort of screenshot of, well, you can't really see that, can you? Of the outlines, and basically it's just a little like thumbnail of like the structure of the outline, and you can edit and copy and delete from here. And this is a little screenshot of the menu editor, and you can see that there's a top level menu with a drop down, and that's got the pages option has been clicked, and this has a mega menu underneath with 4 columns, and you can adjust the columns just by dragging the little divider. And you can pick a different menu item, like a different menu, just like in Joomla. So this is like extending the Joomla menu manager to provide functionality that it doesn't have. You can also drag modules and particles into the menu and place them in columns and so forth. So it's all things that we used to do, but it was really kludgy before. We try to make this as intuitive as possible. This is a little screenshot of how the styles page looks. So at the top, these are presets. So it's sort of showing a thumbnail, but if you click on one of these, it will apply those presets to this styles picker. It's not a hard-coded thing. It's sort of like it's just copying the values in, and then you can modify them as much as you like. And you can also create your own presets too, if that's something that you wanted for your clients to be able to have different colors and stuff for different sections of the site. And there's also a recompile CSS button up there because we use Sass, which is a pre-compilation requirement. Like it's in a language that has to be compiled into CSS. It's a very CSS-like language, but you still have to compile it. It will automatically compile if you're in the development mode, but if you're in production mode, you have to manually compile. That's just a performance optimization, so we don't have to check if the files have been modified, because that slows things down. This is an example of a settings panel. So these are some particle settings. So each one of these little blocks, if you can see it, and it's not really defined well enough, but like that branding is a particle, that custom HTML is a particle, copyright is a particle, and they've just got form fields in there. Some of these screenshots are a little bit old. They have slightly changed now, and I'll show you when we do a demo afterwards, but basically it's the same. So this is the layout manager, and you can see there's a sidebar with all the particles we have, and then the layout here, and you can kind of see that they're broken up into different, these horizontal sections, and then inside of those you can put rows, and then you drag things into those rows. You can reorder the rows and change the column widths, and you can create lots of these outlines. So you can have one for your home page. You can have, and it can look totally different. You can have one for your, for your blog or your contact us page or whatever you want. And with the inheritance system, you can inherit things. So for example, if you define in your base outline the header, and it's got a logo and a menu, and you want to use that on multiple different outlines, you can just inherit that one section. It's quite powerful. You can turn off inheritance. You can clone it. I'll get into it. It's super flexible. So this is the assignments panel, where you can assign the outline and to different menu items, just like you would in regular Joomla. And this is just an example of our first Gantry 5 template, and this was called Callisto, and that was released in May 2015, I think. So it's not been that long since we've had Gantry 5 out in the wild. I think a year and 5 months or so. So I was just going to dive in a little bit into some of the specific parts. So a particle is basically, it's supposed to be, it's equivalent to a Joomla module, but instead of having to write that in PHP and zip it up and install it, it's basically a very small bit of code that is actually written in TWIG for the rendering and YAML for the configuration. And that YAML basically defines form fields that will show up in the Gantry admin as a little, as the form fields that you need to fill in, and you can just reference those from the TWIG, and it's very easy to make, anything you can think of. Like, we've started building a lot of the functionality we would have traditionally used a Joomla component for with modules. We can just do with particles now. So slideshows, tabs, logins, basically anything that's visual can be done with a particle. And we even have a particle that lets you access Joomla articles. So there's an article wrapping particle too. So you can put Joomla articles wherever you want on your page. It doesn't have to be straight in the middle. And also we have particles for, I'm probably going to cover this in a little bit, but particles for including Joomla modules, Joomla module positions. So it's really integrated tightly into Joomla's overall methodology. But they basically can be written really, really quickly. And if you've ever looked at Gantry 5 particles and the ones that we include, you could probably write your own in, half an hour to do, a tab system or something. It's pretty trivial. This is an example of the configuration. So you can kind of see here, and it's not really that readable, but on the left here is the YAML configuration for this particular particle. And it's got some form fields defined. So it's got a checkbox to turn on and off the particle. That's basically represented by this little green slider over here. You can see the cursor, so I can just use that. And then there's a title field, and it just type input text. So, and this picker for picking your picture of your kitten. Oops, jumped ahead. A text area field and an extra class, and you can set attributes on those. But basically, that's the YAML. So it's basically a tabbed text file with name value pairs. It supports arrays and things, but it's pretty simplistic. So you just write that file, and Gantry renders it like that. So it renders the form from that. It's much easier than the traditional Joomla form management. And then, for example, this was just a simple particle that was showing a picture and a title and a description. Well, this is the appropriate TWIG for it. So you can see there's some TWIG code that includes this base particle, html.twig, and this block is a particle type. And then it's just HTML, and then you just use these little TWIG tags with the double curly brackets, mustache style tagging, and it's just like particle.header, and then like the pipe is to escape it to make sure that it's safe. But particle.header, particle.description, and that's it. And then that renders on the front end like that. So I mean, if you've ever done a Joomla module, to do the same thing would be a fair amount of work, even though it's a very simple thing. But in Gantry, to create a particle to do that is very easy. And if you were paying attention to the previous talk, when you were talking about molecules and so forth, this would be a molecule. So very easy, and the whole templating side of things at Rocket Theme is built up from these particles. So we are building particles, and then we're just sort of building all those together in a layout to form the resulting page. And this is sort of how presets work. So we have presets in a couple of different types of presets. We've got presets for style presets, and then we have layout presets. So you can't just randomly create these entire layout presets, but you can write them in YAML, and there's like a YAML example here, and then you can make them available. So they are customizable. You can create them. It's just not like a WYSIWYG to create those layout presets, but it's very easy to do. You just take one and you just modify it, and then you just rename it to something else. But for example, in the hydrogen theme for Gantry, we have a whole bunch of presets with like 2 columns with the sidebar on the left, and 2 columns with the sidebar on the right, and 3 columns. And then there's some platform ones too. So like for example, in Joomla, there is typically a template for the 404 page, stuff like that. So we have a layout for that. So you can create presets for this. So if you were going to a client and they wanted to have a variety of different sort of layouts, you can create those presets for them, so that when they go to add a new page, they can pick the right preset. They don't have to manually set that up. So these are the style presets that I was explaining before, where you can create these sort of color combinations, and then it applies those color settings. And we use this all the time for our demos where we'll release a particular a Joomla template, Gantry theme, and it will have a variety of colors that you pick from, but these are just presets, and they're just applying colors, and then it's recompiling them. So there's only one theme. And then there's a theme YAML file which defines the whole theme. So if you were doing a custom theme for a client, you basically would be modifying this theme.yaml file, and it's just a very simple YAML file. You can just use the default example and modify it to your needs. But it defines things like for the about page and some other specifics about dependencies and all the other things, where the documentation is, what the URL is for updates and so forth. So a little bit about form fields. So throughout the Gantry admin, we use forms everywhere. So we developed our own set of form fields. And again, these are defined in YAML, rendered in TWIG. All of Gantry uses the same technology throughout. So, and these form fields are very similar to the ones inside of Grav, because that's where they came from, but they've been extended. So for example, we have a very sophisticated font picker. We have a color picker, an icon picker, file picker. We have collections. We have these presenter fields for things just like descriptions. We have like the module picker, which is specific to Joomla, so you can pick a Joomla module to render. Particle pickers, key value lists, and all the standard HTML5 fields that you know and love, like date and file and all those other ones. So this is an example of the font picker. So the font picker is pretty advanced. It actually renders the fonts from Google Fonts, and there are, like I said, 780 fonts in there now, and it's getting added to all the time because this is like a dynamic list. And it's pretty smart about this. So it only loads the fonts that are visible plus a few extra ones. And as you scroll, it's like Ajax loading these fonts, because if you were to load 780 fonts on your browser, it would probably crash. So it's pretty smart about it. You can search for fonts. If you click on a font, it expands it, and you can pick specific font styles and font weights, different character sets. So it basically supports everything that Google Font supports, and it's built right into to the Gantry 5 admin. And if you want to provide a specific, the ability to pick a font style, it's right there. It's pretty powerful. So we have a pretty nice color picker too. It supports RGBA, so for transparency, and it's got all the standard stuff. If you've ever used Photoshop, which I'm sure you have, or something similar, it's got the hue, brightness, and saturation styles of color picking. And then we have an icon picker, which is using Font Awesome, and it's similar to the font picker in that it's rendering these in a variety of styles. It supports most of the Font Awesome capabilities with animations and the size and the rotation. You can just pick your particular font. You can browse for it, search for it, pick a size, any effect that Font Awesome supports, like fixed width, and then you can just use that. And we use that quite a bit. So a little summary of inheritance inside of Gantry. There's basically three types. There's the default theme inheritance stuff, which is basically the YAML configuration files. They're sort of trickled down. So there's like a base configuration, and you can override that. And that sort of system is built in. Then there's the layout inheritance, where you define a specific layout, and then you can inherit part of that or not. And then there's the inheritance for the JavaScript and CSS, those kind of things. It's slightly different from the regular particle inheritance, but it's similar. But all of these things have this inheritance capability, and this lets you do the least amount of work that you need to do. So you can define a whole bunch of sensible defaults, and then when you need to extend something or modify something, you just do it in that one place. And it also means if you want to change like your logo, manually do it and all your layouts and everything, you just change it once. And if you inherit the logo particle, it will It will change everywhere. So the theme inheritance, this is sort of showing the progression. You have the YAML file that defines the original settings, and then you can override those in the particle defaults, which are on the base outline. So for example, if you've got like that logo, you could define a specific logo in the YAML, and then you could override that in the base outline, and then in the custom outlines, your user outlines, you can override it there if you want to, and then even in the specific particle, you can override it there. I mean, you don't have to do any of this, but it just gives the maximum amount of control where you can basically modify things right down to the last step. For the layout inheritance, you can inherit at the section level and at the particle level. You can inherit block level settings, item attributes, or both. I mean, basically, the short summary of all this is you can inherit almost anything inside a Gantry. You can do as little or as much as you want. It can be a little bit overwhelming, but once you've done it a couple of times, you'll realize that the benefits of this flexible system is that basically you can do anything you want, and you can do it really smartly by inheriting only the bits that you need, and it will just minimize the amount of work that you have to do, and if your client makes any changes, it'll minimize the amount of change that means, and the amount of effort and time and expense that's going to take. I'll kind of skip over these things. It's just easier seen. There's a little GIF here sort of showing the inheritance tab, which I think was 5.3. Someone might know better than me. In my Gantry 5.3 where we put this in. But basically you can inherit, this is a section level inheritance. That's why you're clicking on the little gear on that header section. And then you can pick another outline to inherit from, and then there's checkboxes there to inherit from. I know it's really fast. To inherit from the section attributes or the section children. And then it's going to be saved. So similarly, you can inherit entire sections, like all sections at one time, by basically picking from the load. The load button previously just sort of loaded all the values from another layout, which was useful if you were building another layout and you wanted it to look similar to something else, but then with some modifications. You would just load that other layout and you would then make your changes. The problem there is that those became two separate entities at that point, and any changes made in one wouldn't affect the other. So inheritance basically lets you load a layout, and it's going to be, as you can see, in each section has its own reference to the layout that it's coming from, and then you can either turn that off or customize it for your needs. But that's the mass inheritance. Particle inheritance, you can see that this clicked on the gear for the particle. I think it's the menu particle. Yeah, so it's the menu particle, clicked on the gear for that. So the inheritance tab's in there, and you can inherit from another outline. And then if you want to include the attributes or the block settings or both. And then it's going to look slightly different. It's going to have this like hashing on it to show that it's inheriting from another outline. So that's an example of how that works. Yeah, there's also a lock icon that we use throughout. So these little locks on the top of these tabs show that they are not inheriting, and as soon as you click the little checkbox, they become locked, so they are inheriting. You can't change the values until you unlock it, because well, you can't change it because it's inheriting those values from another layout. This is a similar thing, but for the atoms, and you can inherit atoms from another layout in a similar way. But you have to pick a specific one. That's why they're slightly different. But here's one for the Google Analytics. So some more information. Obviously, the Gantry.org site is the homepage for the Gantry.org for the Gantry framework. As it's an open source project, we basically have our own .org website for it. It's a separate project from Rocket Theme itself. Rocket Theme is just the developer of this project, the primary developer, and we make use of it. But Gantry itself is its own theme framework, has its own site. The docs quite extensive, docs.gantry.org. And the source is up on GitHub, obviously. And we have that chat room. It's very active, lots of talk going on there. If you were working with Gantry and you had questions, that's the best place to go to get help. And then a demo. So, how much time do I have? Does anyone know? Do I have till 11? Yeah. Okay. Ooh, not much time. Okay. So let's just close that. So let me do a quick. It's going to be hard with. Can I use this? Okay. Like, is this even working? Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure. Okay. So this is a bare bones Joomla install. I don't think I have anything installed in here. No. So you can, if you want to, install Gantry direct from the web through the JED. In the JED's infinite wisdom, you search for Gantry and you have a heck of a time finding it. It's buried. Nice responsive design. Okay, it's there. So you can install it directly from here. I don't want that. How's it doing that? You can install it directly from here. That's fine. Shall I do it? Okay, I'll install it. I'll see what happens. Oh no, that's not it. Huh. What did I do wrong? Oh, I was on the wrong page. Okay, so you can install it directly from here, and it will install. Yay, did it? I don't know if this is the network here. It's having trouble loading something. Okay, I think it installed. But there are no themes available. The JED has rules that frameworks can't have templates in them, I guess. So you basically have to install a theme, and I downloaded some. So I'm going to install the Helium template. Oh, I don't know what this is. What's going on? Oh. The wrong thing. So, so I installed this Helium template, and basically this is the template installed just like a regular Joomla template, but we have this extra additional option to install the sample data, and it will install some sample menu and set the default theme and so forth. And we've got jumped straight into to the configuration. But if you go to the Gantry 5 themes under configuration, you'll see all the available Gantry 5 themes that you have on your system, and you can click on configure. So this is basically the admin for it. You can see these top level global things. These are the various outlines, and you can add new outlines. You can create one, copy them, modify them. Here's the menu. There's not a whole lot on the menu. It's just got one page or one menu item on this particular one. There's the about, some extra stuff. You can switch into production or development up there. I'll keep it on production for now. So going back to the outlines, so there's the base outline, and this is sort of setting some of the core things. Like here's the font picker. You can see here you can type your own text. It's loading the fonts. You can search for a font, Roboto, and then you can pick, a specific one and try and get out of there. Color pickers, so this is where you can pick your colors and change them to ugly ones. Particle default, so this is something that changed since we did the initial release. We basically moved the particle defaults into the base outline. So this is where you can set up like the default branding. For example, here's like a little a bit of HTML that will be the powered by. Here's a logo, setting the default logo and so forth like that. Here's some article defaults, some Joomla articles, some menu defaults. So basically all the particles on your system can have these default values, and you set them in the base outline. And then in your specific outline, this home particle, particles used to be under each outline, and this is sort of telling you that it's now moved. But this is where you can have like some page settings, some global header properties, some body attributes, any assets, any specific JavaScript and so forth for this layout. And then the layout itself is where you configure how big the menu is in relation to your logo. And you can go in here and you can click on these and make your modifications. If you need a modification to that, that is different from your default values. So that's kind of where the inheritance comes in. And you can drag things in here. So if I wanted to drag in this page content particle, I can drag it in there. I can resize it, any size. I can go in, I can modify this. That's going to display the Joomla content. So there's not really a lot of configuration options there. But this is a custom HTML one, so you can put custom HTML in here. And then here's the assignments. Oh, it's got all these warnings. You're going to lose your changes. Oh, one pretty cool thing is if you make a mistake, you can undo it. So this has got a full history, so you can undo all your So if I were to put a module instance in here and I really messed this up, and I added a new row, and I put some system messages in here, and I said I wanted to have my copyright here, and this was all wrong. So now I can go and I can just undo, and I can get right back to where I was, right back to the start. So that's a nice feature that can really save you bacon. So anyway, when you so this is all the configuration, and then if you were to make a change, you get, well, kind of like when I just did a resize. It's basically doing this little pulsating icon. So that sort of tells you that there are changes pending. And then this Save Layout button also has the pulsating icon too, so you would hit that to commit your saves. I'm not going to do that though. I'm going to view the site. So this is what this theme actually looks like. So you can see here, it's just a one-pager. It's got tabs. So if I wanted to make a modification really quick, I could go to this content tabs particle, and you can see there are two content items here. So I could say, new tab, and then I could click on that. And this is my tab content. So settings have been applied, but you still have to click Save. So I will apply and save that. And then on my home page here, I added two new tabs accidentally, but I've got new tab, and this is my tab content. So that's how easy it is just to add a new tab. So that's just powered by the tab particle. And then you could add another, you could add something in here. You could add a custom HTML particle in here, and then this is my custom HTML. And you can also process TWIG in here, and also shortcode, so that's kind of handy. So apply and save. So then here, now I've got a 50-50 column, because that's what I basically set it up with. No, wrong one. Here, so it's 50-50, but say I want to make this much smaller. So save the layout, and now I reload, and now it's much smaller. So it's a much more visual representation of how your page is going to look, and you build your pages with these particles. It's really a very easy way to develop. So I think I've run out of time. I had more to demo, but do you have any questions or anything you want to ask?
So well, good work, by the way.
Thanks.
Between the implement the UI for a WordPress, or Joomla for a graph administrator, I mean, is it?
It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. Yeah, it's exactly the same. In fact, we hardly even showed different screenshots of the back because it is the same. I mean, you've got, in WordPress, for example, you've got the WordPress sidebar and the WordPress header, but then everything else is all Gantry 5. It looks exactly the same. And in Grav, it looks even better because the admins are so similar. So it ties really well together. But yeah, it's really easy to hop between platforms this way. Kind of the platform becomes your source of your content, but then everything else can be done within Gantry. So the platform is less important than it would have traditionally have been. And also that means you can develop more easily on platforms you may not be quite as familiar with, because a lot of the work that you're doing is coming from Gantry itself.
Any plans for support of Drupal?
We had Drupal, a Drupal club with Rocket Theme. We found that the community is very different from Joomla and even from WordPress in that most Drupal developers are designing sort of from scratch. They didn't want to use themes. They didn't want to use frameworks. So the amount of effort that's involved just didn't make sense. On the Gantry side, if someone wanted to come along and do a Drupal support inside of Gantry, of course we would be open to it. But it's just not something we're really going to do.
Hey, Andy, thanks again. As I mentioned before, we run around millions of projects, all of which pretty much powered by Rocket Theme. The questions I was just curious of where, like, obviously moving forward, some of the things I've bumped up against where we have sites, we typically stand up sites very quickly, jump down very quickly. Mm-hmm. One of the things I've often struggled with is how do you sit with Gantry 5 and how do I easily identify particles? You know what I mean?
Like what needs to be a particle?
Yes, we've stood something up 3 weeks ago. The guy goes, I want you to change that. And I'm like, I don't even know where the hell that is. So again, traditional Joomla, whatever, you can even go and edit mode on the front and go, I know what I'm looking at here.
Yeah. Well, through the layout manager, I mean, it is much more visual than it used to be. You can kind of, for example, for that tab section that I just went to, right? Like if they said I wanted another tab, it's much more visually obvious what that is. And the sections are sort of named, like you name these. Okay, so when you build these for your client, so you name these. So like you might have named that tabs. Like in this case, it was called utility, and inside of there's a particle called content tabs. So you kind of know that's where it is.
If you just look back to your front, the Helium page, so wherever that build your beautiful thing. So how do I
how'd you know?
Identify what module that is or what particle that's for?
Well, basically, let's see, what is it? It's just a text thing. Okay, so basically this page has this menu on the top. It has this sort of carousel thing here.
Yep.
And then below that is this sort of static section that is this, build your beautiful theme. Well, in the layout, you've got this navigation section, this header section with an owl carousel, and then this intro section. So I'm going to look in that intro section, and that's exactly where it is. So it's just sort of it's linear. Like this is a representation of your page. Okay, so this layout. So if you name things appropriately, you will know. Even the section names will trigger it. So this is kind of like a generic theme. Yeah. So these are labeled very generically. Yeah. But if you were doing this for a client, you would label it what that thing is. So if it's like like the top is like a picture of a shark, right, for something or other, you'd probably say, shark picture as your section. I mean, you may name it that way. That makes sense because then you can easily find it later, or it could be header picture at least, or something.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. We wind up with this. I mean, one I've kind of grown up with Rocket Bean, so I've got like expansion A, and I'll have like
Yeah, we wanted to get away from that. Okay, all of these names are easily customizable. So like in the traditional Joomla development world, we used to have sidebar A, sidebar B, content A, content B, section A, section B, section C. You never knew what was in where, right? Or like how that page was built because there was no visual representation of it. You have to turn on like module positions on the front end and then try and work out. And then you've got to work out like, okay, what menu item am I in? Is that module assigned on that menu, on that page? We wanted to get away from that and make this easier. So we basically have these different layouts. You can see what layout's assigned to what page. It's much easier.
That's the direction.
Yeah, it's much simpler.
Did say that to me, and I was like, my head tried to start caving in on itself. And I'm like, what does it mean?
Well, the Joomla module and menu interaction is very confusing to most people.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make that simpler. Okay, I guess we're done. All right, thanks, guys. I'm going to be sticking around for a little bit, and if you have any Gantry questions, I'll do my best. If you have any Grav questions, I'll be glad to talk about that too. All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.